Hello and welcome to HD Philosophy, the channel where we take some time with the classics to awaken the hidden dragon within all of you. And this is episode 10 of the Gospel Meditations, where we meditate on this week's Gospel, Revelations 1:17 through 19.
Let's go!
When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. But he placed his right hand on me, saying, "Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last and the living one. I was dead, and see, I am alive forever and ever. I have the keys of death and of Hades. Now write what you have seen, what is and what is to take place after this." So this week's sermon from Pastor Sheldon, he was talking about being left in darkness. So this is after the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, where everything is left in darkness. And this was the first year I attended a Roman Catholic sermon on Friday. And I was just amazed how we were left in darkness at the end of the sermon as we prayed the rosary. And this darkness, this power of being left in darkness, it's like, if Jesus didn't come back, if Jesus wasn't resurrected, then none of Christianity makes sense whatsoever. I mean, Bishop Barron was talking about this week as well, where he says, without the resurrection, there is no Christianity, there is no Catholicism, there is no Orthodox. It's only the resurrection that brings everything back, because Jesus is the light and the way. And I'm reminded of this example I give to my students in order to talk about the categorical imperative through Immanuel Kant. Because Immanuel Kant talked about his morality as that which continues to free the individual. So immorality is illogical and subjugates the individual. It makes them more heteronymous. It's very much akin to sin in that way. So one of the examples I provide my students when we talk about the categorical imperative is just imagine a beam of light that you are walking. And for Kant, the categorical imperative, because it follows logic and reason, keeps you on that light path. Now, I'm not saying I agree with him, but stick with the metaphor for now. That which goes against the categorical imperative, that which is illogical or uses somebody as a means to an end, puts you on a different path. And the immorality is kind of proportional to how far away from that light you have strayed. So you can imagine a person who would have made the moral decision and made it for the right reasons when it comes to Kant. It's that hypothetical you that remained on the course of light when you continued to walk. So that's what one ought to do. Now bring it back to Jesus is the light and the way. The metaphor works in the same way. Jesus is the bridge, this bridge of light that you are walking. And sin is actually defined by how much you have strayed away from that light. This is what C.S. Lewis talked about in Mere Christianity. Sin doesn't have its own ontological existence. Sin is defined by the absence of light. Darkness doesn't exist on its own. Darkness is just a mere absence of light. Same thing with cold. And I've said this before, like hot and cold as well. So cold is only defined as the absence of heat. It doesn't have its own ontological existence. And C.S. Lewis pointed this out in the same way. And I'm just really taken by this, because this is what led to my conversion. Because I was always a moralist, and in philosophy, I was just fascinated with ethics. And I just hit this roadblock where I came to the first principles where I was like, well, wait a minute. If the only thing that is good without qualification is the goodwill, then what is this good? What is this good that needs to exist at the foundation of reality? Descartes couldn't bring any kind of knowledge back on the table when he just took on the full-on skepticism of the senses. He needed to bring God back into the equation in order to know anything about the world itself. This is also something Stephen Myers runs with in his book, The God Hypothesis, So if Jesus is the light and the way, nobody gets to the Father but through him. He is the light path that allows you to walk that moral road. Without Jesus, without the Lord, there is no light. And that's something C.S. Lewis really hit. And it was just such a powerful sermon this week when we ended Friday night in darkness. But there's this other aspect of Revelations that I just find absolutely fascinating, the keys of death and Hades. So Pastor Sheldon talked about experiencing death. So Jesus Christ was all man and all God. So he actually experienced death and went into Hades. But a Orthodox friend of mine was talking about how Jesus purposely went into Hades, purposely surrounded himself with death in order to venture down. It's almost like Satan takes the bait by bringing him down, and then Jesus snatches the keys, and then he is resurrected, forever freeing us from death. It is done. No longer are we to fear death if we follow Jesus. And I just so happened to be reading Matthew 4 at this time. Now, in Matthew 4, Jesus goes out into the desert, and the desert really has the symbology of like the chaos. It's like you are full of order when you're in town, but when you're in the desert, it's like just pure nothingness, pure chaos. You have no direction, you know? So it's almost like removing all forms of order and placing yourself in an area of all possibilities. But Bishop Barron talked about this in the Catholic Study Bible when he was talking about the temptations of Satan. So Satan tempts Jesus in 3 different ways. And Bishop Barron is like, Jesus goes out there into the desert and he's tempted by Satan. Satan offers him, food. Then he offers him to throw himself down in worship, and then like offers him the entire world. And it's like Jesus surrounds himself with the temptation of Satan. And this is before the resurrection. So it's almost like a prelude to what's going to happen in Hades. And then he denies him at the foundation. So that's what Bishop Barron said. He surrounds himself with the lure of the sin and then denies it at its core, cutting it from its core. And then for some reason, I recalled this story I heard of a bishop who was inspired by the beauty of a famous prostitute. This is the story of Bishop Nonus and what would eventually become Saint Pelagia. She was a prostitute at the time, but she ends up becoming Saint Pelagia the Penitent. And Bishop Nonus arrives with a bunch of different bishops, and across the street there's this beautiful courtesan, Pelagia, and the rest of the bishops avert their eyes, but not Bishop Nonus. He looks right at her. And what he's struck by is not just her beauty, but the time and dedication that she takes. And it's something to the effect of he's kind of moved by how much action she takes, how much intention there is in her beauty. And then he thinks about if it was just oriented correctly, how much she would give to the Lord. And so while the other ones averted their eyes, Bishop Nonus took account of what was going on, and that inspiration would later on carry into a sermon that he preaches. He preaches a sermon on beauty, and then what sinners who are misguided put their actions and their dedication and their life towards, and if we can just orient that correctly. But what the bishop didn't know is that Pelagia was actually in that sermon. And upon hearing it, it's almost like she knew he was talking about her. It just pierced her heart. And she said it kind of lit her heart on fire, It's so funny how we often have this symbolism of fire as both like destructive and purifying. Think about the phoenix metaphor, right? Anybody who's learned something new about their life that just destroys what they thought knows this feeling right here. It's just everything comes crumbling down. But Pelagia describes the sermon as just striking her heart and changing her course. And then she ends up becoming very penitent and she becomes a saint. But what's incredible about this is that it all started by Bishop Nonus refusing to avert his gaze. Not looking at her with lust, which the other bishops seemed to fear, but rather looking at her with love, compassion, and that fed the intention. And so he was able to produce a sermon that struck at the heart of the sin, dismantling it at its core, unnerving its foundation. Without that lust that Pelagia as a courtesan or as a prostitute relied on, without that lust, there was nothing else for the sin to hold on to. And it's just absolutely incredible that it all started with him refusing to avert his eyes and kind of give in to the possibility of the temptation, like keeping his heart solid, because obviously this bishop was well oriented, and the power that produced. Sometimes we have to go into the devil's den. You know, this is a archetypal story, like Jaws, for example. You can't ignore the monster in the deep, because it'll just get closer and closer to your borders until it takes somebody out, right? The Lion King. See, Simba has to come back. He ran away from his responsibilities, and now the chaos of the hyenas have taken over the kingdom. His kingdom is in ruin, but he can't fix it until he confronts his uncle. He left and then had to confront the sin of him ignoring his responsibilities, surrounding himself with it so he can destroy it at its foundation. And then the Knights of the Round Table. Oh man, I love this. The Knights of the Round Table, before they started their Holy Grail quest, they stood outside Camelot and they looked at the edge of the forest. And each of them started the quest in the area that scared them the most. So it was the place they've been ignoring. That's where their quest started. And that's the power of this sermon. Not just that Jesus is the way, because he is, but that the power that sin has over you means that you have to meet it and then break it down at its foundation, not just run from it the entire time, you know? And I can imagine there's a lot of individuals who are just like, I may not be strong enough. And I get that. I have the same issue as well. But the point is to get to a place where I can surround myself with the temptation and destroy it at its foundation.
Champions of this battle are...
Too scared to come out and face me.
Let's have a nice chat, eh?
Thank you for watching HD Philosophy. Like, share, and subscribe.